Hello everyone, Jolene here from Bookworm Adventure Girl. I hope that you are all doing well and enjoying some autumn weather. Autumn is my favorite season, and this weekend is Canadian Thanksgiving. So we are celebrating tonight with some family from out of town and a nice, I hope it's nice dinner, haven't made it yet. You will also notice that I have now set up a spot in what will be the library. But until I get some shelving, it will look a little messy. So please excuse all of the boxes and the books and everything else that you see behind me. Over time, hopefully, this will get better and you can watch the progress. So for this video, I have to go back a few months into the summer to tell you about the books that I read. So this wrap up is going to include the books I read in July, August, and September, since I was a bit behind in my wrap-ups from the summer. So hopefully this will get us caught up. And in July, I only read 3.5 books. 1.5 of them was for the Mondays with Margaret series. So I am not going to talk about those books here, but please, if you're interested, check out that series if you enjoy Margaret Atwood, and I will leave a link in the description box. So the first book that I did finish was Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. And I read this as a buddy read with Christine and Karen, who are subscribers, and I must say that they make reading any book more fun. You might remember that we read the Satanic Verses together, and we made it through that. So when we started Gone with the Wind, I think that we were all like, this is such a breath of fresh air. We understood what was happening in the book, and I know that for myself, I enjoyed this book much more. And again, it's always a delight to be able to discuss it as we were reading along too. So Gone with the Wind is a huge classic. It's considered to be one of the most popular books of all time. It was originally published in 1936, and this was a debut novel that won the Pulitzer Prize. So it was a pretty big deal. And I know that I've said this before on other videos, but I literally knew nothing about this story going into it. I knew that there was a movie. I knew that there were characters named Scarlett and Rhett, and I knew, of course, the famous line, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn." Beyond that, I knew nothing. And it turns out that there is so much more to this book. The story takes place in the South in the 1860s in Georgia and Atlanta, and it takes place during the American Civil War. And this is a coming-of-age story of the main character, Scarlett O'Hara, who goes from having everything to finding herself in poverty. And I thought that all of the characters were well developed. We see Scarlett go from a superficial, spoiled young girl who thinks that she's in love with a man named Ashley, to become a strong woman who forms an unlikely friendship with another woman and learns to think of others. And it's a huge book, but it moves quite well, and there is so much going on with the war. There are love triangles, and Scarlett finds herself in some pretty interesting predicaments. So I think that the best part of the book for me is the characters and the themes. There were some obvious themes, the war, obviously, and the Southern life and lifestyle, including slavery, which was sometimes hard to read, how slaves were spoken of and spoken to and how they were treated. But there is also the themes of land. Scarlett tries to keep her family's plantation named Tara. And I think that the two themes I enjoyed the most were just overcoming obstacles, which is, constant throughout the whole story, and the role of women. And I had to keep reminding myself that the book was written in the 30s and that it was taking place in the late 1800s, because Scarlett goes against many of the expectations of women. Mostly it's for survival, but she has a lot of gumption, And she bugged me a bit. I didn't fall in love with her character, but I did enjoy how her story evolved. And ultimately, I thought that the book was well written and was worth the time to read. And I still need to watch the movie and do some comparisons. But I am also thinking that maybe they could put out a different movie, another movie, a remake. It's been a while. The other book that I read in July was also a group read. I read Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. And this group read was hosted by A.J. Dunn from A.J. Dunn Reads and Writes. And Sandy from Miss Reads a Lot was part of the group. And so was Debbie, who is a subscriber and a reader. So this was my third Jane Austen novel. And my favorite thing about it was that I had the opportunity to read it with others and discuss it a bit as we went along. So this was Austen's first novel that she wrote, although it wasn't published until later. And of the 3 Austen books that I've read, I found it to be the easiest book to read of the 3. It's short. It was easy to keep track of all of the characters and know who everybody was. But I would say that it's my second favorite so far. I liked it more than Emma because I did have a hard time reading Emma, but I didn't enjoy it, nearly as much as Pride and Prejudice. The main character, Catherine, was likable enough, and the story is basically about her time in Bath, spending time with the Allen family. And Northanger Abbey actually doesn't come into the picture until halfway through, maybe even more than halfway through the book. So, of course, the story also includes the usual Austen elements, the love of reading, which I love that Austen includes that. 2 potential men that Catherine could end up with, and kind of an innocent or maybe naive understanding of what love is. So this is an okay book for me. I'm glad I read it, and I'm so grateful for the group that I read it with. And that brings us to August. And in August, I read 0 books. So that's easy. And that brings us to September. And in September, I read 19 books. 2 of them, again, were for the Mondays with Margaret series. So I won't be talking about those ones here. So that leaves us with 17 more books to talk about. So I will try to go through this book pile as quickly as possible while still telling you enough about the books to maybe know if you are interested in them or not. So I'm going to start with the memoirs that I read because that's how I started the month, which was by reading Stories to Tell by Richard Marx. And I have been a fan of Richard Marx since the 80s, so this was a bit of a nostalgic read for me. I thought that the book was written well, and it was interesting to learn stories of where ideas for his songs have come from, and what motivates and inspires him, and the many different people and genres of music that he has both had an impact on and that he's been impacted by. So if you are a fan or if you want to learn more about him, this is definitely worth a read. And if you prefer audio, the audio is actually Richard Marx reading it, so that might be something you might enjoy. The second memoir is Not My Father's Son by Alan Cumming, and I love Alan Cumming, and I love how this memoir was written. Alan focuses mostly on his relationship with his father. The story is heart-wrenching, but he manages to be hopeful. He's honest, direct, and funny. His relationship with his father was not a good one, and at one point there are some questions around who his biological father even is. And Alan writes about what he learns through being on the show, Who Do You Think You Are? And shares how that experience of learning of his ancestors really helped to heal his family and the years of pain that he endured. So this is another memoir which the audio is read by the author. And Alan has another memoir coming out in November. So I'm really looking forward to reading that one as well. The next book I read is a debut novel. It is Wood, It is Stone by Brazilian-American author Gabriella Burnham. And although I read this novel on my Kindle, I just want to point out that the cover is stunning. I absolutely love it. The writing is engaging from the beginning, and the story flows quickly. It's not a lengthy novel, which I think lends itself to its enjoyability. The story is about an American couple named Linda and Dennis. And Dennis is a professor, and he gets an opportunity to teach at a university in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And the protagonist, Linda, is a typical character. She's unhappy in their marriage, and she sees this opportunity as a new beginning. So this begins a year of self-awareness in Brazil, and the story is very character-driven. So if you like those kind of stories, this would be a good one. Linda grapples with relationships with her husband, with other women, with herself and her body. And I began the novel thinking that this could be a new favorite author, and that could still be the case. I was just hoping for something a little bit more from this book. My interest waned just a bit, and I can't completely put my finger on why, but I really enjoyed the writing. I didn't love any of the characters, but I did think that they were well developed, and the story had some elements of Atwood's work when it comes to themes like women, relationships, sexuality, and race. So overall, I'm thinking this is a solid debut, and I think Burnham is definitely an author that I do want to read more of. The fourth book in the pile is one that has been on my TBR for quite some time, and that is Beach Read by Emily Henry, and I absolutely loved this book. It's one of those times when you read the right book at the right time in the right mood, and all of those things are just perfect. And that's kind of what happened here for me. This is a story about two writers, January and Augustus, who are experiencing writer's block. January writes romances, and Augustus writes like crime thriller type stories. So in order to help each other, they decide to switch and write a story in the other writer's genre. And they kind of give each other different assignments that they would do if they were doing their own, writing of their own books. So I loved the banter and the references in this book. It was a fun read while still having enough substance that kept it interesting without it being too fluffy for me. And it definitely made me want to read more of Emily Henry's other books. I have her novel, People You Meet on Vacation. So that has moved up my TBR list since I have read this. And she also has a new book coming out in May of 2022 called, I think it's called Book Lovers. So that's something to look forward to as well. The next couple of books are Canadian books that were both longlisted for the Giller Prize, and both are about 3 generations. The first is Fight Night by Miriam Toews, and this story is written from the perspective of Swiv, who is 9 years old. Her mother is pregnant and her father is MIA. And I do love novels that are written from the perspective of younger people, but it did seem hard to believe sometimes. Sometimes for me, she seemed older than 9. But I did love the characters. They were funny. The grandmother, Elvira, is spunky. The story is really about what we have to do in order to survive. That we have to be willing to fight in order to survive. So I've read 1 or 2 other books by Toews, and this is by far my favorite. And this novel has now been put into the short list for the Giller, so we will see what happens. So the other book that I read from the Giller long list was Swimming Back to Trout River by Linda Rui Feng. And I put this on my shortlist hopefuls, and I'm disappointed that it didn't make it because it is a beautifully written story. It's about 3 generations who have all been affected by the Chinese Cultural Revolution in some way. I loved the themes in this story: disability, loss, grief, immigration, and I loved that music kind of becomes a character in the book. So the story is told from 4 different perspectives. Junie, who is a young girl who is living with her grandparents, while her parents try to make a way for themselves in America. And the plan is that they will then send for her to join them. Momo is Junie's father and who loves music. Cassia is Junie's mother, and Dawn is a friend of Momo's. So the story is quite tragic, and yet the author writes in a way that allows you to understand the characters and their connections to each other, the influences of Chinese culture and the time, and what people will do in order to survive. So ultimately, I think the story is about the sacrifices and decisions that we make in life. They are not always easy, and things do not always turn out the way that we hope or think and plan that they will, and we live with those consequences. So this is a powerful debut, and I very much look forward to reading more from this author. So up next is another Canadian author, Small, Broke, and Kind of Dirty by Hana Shafi. I've enjoyed Shafi's poetry before and was not disappointed in Shafi's narrative in Small, Broke, and Kind of Dirty. Like Shafi's poetry, the themes are similar: mental illness, sexuality, cultural dynamics, feminism, and allyship. They're all part of these vignettes. And Shafi makes you think about some pretty big and hot topics like misogyny, women's rights, LGBTQIA2S+, and the myths around what it means to be a Muslim. So whether you agree or not with Shafi's thoughts, there is definitely clarity in how she feels and thinks about these things. The main message in all of it, I think, is that it is okay to not have it all together. It's like she's giving permission to people to not be perfect, to not be what is expected. And like her poetry book, Shafi also includes her artwork, which really adds to the overall experience of reading this. Okay, the next 3 books are also Canadian authors. And I finally read Tilly and the Crazy Eights by Monique Gray-Smith. I first became aware of this book because it was long listed for, I think it was Canada Reads. And this, does it say? Yes, for Canada Reads. And this is a delightful, heartwarming road trip story of 8 elders: Mabel, Sarah, Annie, Rose and her husband Poncho, Lucy and her best friend Bee, and Chuck, Bee's ex-husband. They all decide to travel to Albuquerque, New Mexico, to attend the Gathering of Nations powwow. And Tilly becomes one of the drivers to get them there. So this road trip is something special and different for everyone. And it's a story of friendships and love, forgiveness, and different Indigenous traditions. The writing is simple, but it is accessible to people of all ages. So it's also playful and fun, while including some very serious topics like residential schools, the trauma from that, and missing and murdered Indigenous women. So I could see this story kind of becoming a comical movie with an important message. The next Canadian author is Nancy Jo Cullen, and her novel, The Western Alienation Merit Badge. I love the cover of this book. It's very vintage looking, and I love that the novel is structured by each chapter being named after Girl Guide badges. So this story is about family dynamics, the Murray family specifically, and it takes place in Calgary, my new hometown, in the early 80s. So there are some great references to that time period. And in the present time, the Murray family are in the midst of grief. And Frances and her sister Bernadette and their father Jimmy all have to figure out how to not only overcome their grief, but overcome their estrangement from each other. But the book does jump back in time to kind of give some background on who the characters are. And if you like books about families or with LGBTQIA2S plus relationships and themes, it's also a bit of a coming of age story, then you might enjoy this one. And the other Canadian author in this pile that I have is one of my all-time favorites. I have read everything she has written, and this time I read A Town Called Solace by Lawson, which takes place in a remote northern Ontario town. And this is another novel with a young protagonist. The story is told by 7-year-old Clara. Her older sister has gone missing. Her parents are trying to protect her by not telling her what's really going on. And Clara's only friend is her neighbor's cat, Moses. And the neighbor, Mrs. Orchard, has been in hospital for some time. And while she's in hospital, this young man moves into her house. So at first, Clara only goes to the house when he isn't there. But eventually the two cross paths, and the truth of all of the connections between the characters and secrets of the past come out. So Crow Lake is still my favorite Lawson novel, but I think A Town Called Solace, I think that it comes in a pretty close second. Up next is the end of a reading experience, and that is Summer by Ali Smith. It's the fourth and final installment of Ali Smith's seasonal quartet. The experience of reading these books in order and in their season has been a comforting delight. Summer reconnects us to familiar and lovable characters, including my favorite, Daniel Gluck, who we first met in Autumn. The same themes of art, war, nature, environment, love of words and language, they all continue in this story as well. And I know that I've said it about the others, but I do think that reading the books in their corresponding season and in order, I think it does make a difference. Each book can stand on its own, but I think that some things would be missed if they were read out of order. So I found this book to be more connected to what was happening in the world. Current events like Brexit, George Floyd, obviously the pandemic, and the US president at the time, they're all taken into consideration, and it kind of makes me wonder what the plan for the series was when Smith first began to write the series, and how much that changed because of current events. And I think it will also be interesting to see how well the writing holds up over time, what meanings will be given to it in, like, say, 10 to 20 years. So this entire series is, in my opinion, totally worth, settling in, getting comfy, and really enjoying the ride. I will definitely miss waiting to read the next book. Okay, we are getting there, everyone. We just have 6 more to go, and I realized that I have another Canadian for you. So next up is another author that I've read all of her fiction books, and that is Half Spent Was the Night by Amy McKay. This is a novella that is kind of like a sequel to McKay's book, The Witches of New York. And I will say that although I liked that it continued with the same characters, I wasn't enamored with this book at all. I didn't think it really added to the story. So I was kind of glad that I picked it up at Ferris Fair Books, which is a used bookstore near me, because I'm not sure that I would have wanted to pay full price for it. If you are already a McKay fan, then you might want to check this out just to see what she does with those characters. But I'm not sure how enjoyable it would be if it was done on its own. So I thought I had this next book in the pile, but I must have missed grabbing it. So I will put a picture of it up. Deacon King Kong by James McBride had a lot of hype when it came out, and I had very high hopes for it. I love the premise of this novel. The story takes place in the projects in Brooklyn in 1969. And the story begins with a deacon, known in the neighborhood as Sportcoat, who shoots the biggest drug dealer in the area in front of several witnesses. So that had my attention, And the book is good. So I don't know if it was my mood at the time or, you know, how much hype the book had, but the novel just fell a bit short for me. There are a lot of characters, all of them with two names. Their given names and then street names or nicknames. And although it did grab my attention in the very beginning, it really waned in the middle until about 75% through when it picked up again for me. It was interesting how James McBride brought the story together in the end. I did like that part. And because it was done so well, I think that's what, you know, kind of made the read a good one for me. Next up is another novel that had a lot of hype, and I really enjoyed this one. I enjoyed it more, and it's The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. This is a historical fiction story inspired by true events of a reform school in Florida. And this novel tells the story of Elwood Curtis. So in light of the graves at residential schools being found here in Canada, along with the stories of residential school survivors, this story kind of made it more real for me. Elwood Curtis is an intelligent young man who could have had such a bright future until something changes everything. And he ends up going to Nickel Academy, where, much like residential schools, it's not really a school at all. And the boys at Nickel Academy deal with all kinds of abuse and then attempt to live normal lives after they leave. And this book to me was an important read and had a bit of a twist that I wasn't expecting. So this is definitely worth picking up. So next on the list is Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. And I'm not sure which pile this is in right now, so I will put a picture of this one up as well. I had watched a virtual event with Neil Gaiman last year sometime and have never read any of his books, but have always wanted to. So I decided to start with this one, and I really enjoyed the writing. This is not a book that I would have picked up on my own, but I'm so glad that I read it. It's a little strange, but it's also funny, and the characters are great. The end of the world is actually coming in the book, and Aziraphale, who's the angel, and Crowley, who's the demon, have mixed feelings about how they feel about the end of the world coming. And they have been on opposite sides forever, but they have also formed an unlikely friendship. And I think that's probably my favorite part of the story, is their friendship and how the idea of good and evil is portrayed in the story. And I also started watching the series that is out on Prime. So I will have to finish that and let you know about that. Talking about weird stories, that kind of sums up this next book. I'm thinking of Ending Things by Iain Reid. Was a weird book, and the narrator is unnamed and unreliable, which I do really like unreliable narrators. The narrator's talking about ending her relationship with her boyfriend Jake, and the anticipation of something about to happen, came from my own head, which might be a sign of good writing. I just figured that something horrible was going to happen. Jake takes the narrator to his family home to introduce her to his parents, and the weirdness continues. And again, I kept thinking that something really horrible is going to happen. On the drive back, it continues to be weird, and then there is a twist, if you want to call it that, at the end. So the book does bring up themes of aging and time, mental illness and death, and it's a quick read. It's actually meant to be read in one sitting, which I didn't quite do. I think it probably took me a couple of times to read it, but I do think that the continuous reading might be helpful. So this was just another strange book, and I did watch the movie on Netflix afterwards, which has convinced me to do a video of the books to movies that I read this year. So I will be talking a little bit more about this one. And then the last book in the pile was one that I really enjoyed, and that is A Woman Is No Man by Etaf Rum. This is a debut novel, and this is another book with 3 generations. This story is told from 2 perspectives. One is Dea, who is a teenager living in Brooklyn with her grandparents, and the other is Dea's mother, Isra, who, as a teenager, left Palestine to marry her husband, Adam, in America. So Dea doesn't want to get married, and she wants to focus on school and on her studies, but her grandparents keep setting her up with potential husbands. So one day, Dea receives a note from someone, anonymous, who seems to know more about Dea's history and holds some answers for Dea. This story is often heartbreaking. The themes of family dynamics, arranged marriages, and freedom are really strong. And I especially liked how the author weaves together the theme of women not having certain freedoms both in Palestine and in the US, but also how men also experience pressure and don't feel free at times as well. So this was a thought-provoking and moving novel, and I highly recommend it. So that brings us up to speed on all of the books that I read in July, August, and September. Please let me know if you have read any of these. Maybe some of them are on your TBR. Let me know what your thoughts are, and let me know what you've been reading as well. I'd love to hear about that. I look forward to chatting with you in the comments. Happy Thanksgiving to all of my Canadian peeps. I hope that everyone enjoys the rest of the day and the weekend, and don't forget to make every day an adventure.